Voters in Georgia today will determine who controls the United States Senate for the next 2 years. The Democratic Party has put me to a terrible, terrible choice. Either I have to vote for a Democrat who's violated every principle I stand for, or I have to vote or support a Republican. I don't like that choice. Please, Democrats, give me better choices in the future. Tomorrow we will be hearing from the Vice President of the United States, whether he plays merely a ceremonial role in announcing the next President of the United States, or whether, spurred on by Ted Cruz and others, he tries to do something that may, in the view of those pushing for this issue, change the outcome of this election. You'll hear why I don't think that's going to happen on The Durst Show. Today and tomorrow will witness consequential elections and tests of our constitutional system. Today in Georgia, voters are voting. Millions have already voted for who will control the United States Senate, at least for the next 2 years. As many of you know, the Republicans now hold a 50-48 lead, but there are 2 runoff elections today, and if the Democrats win both the seats, and the polls suggest they very well may, both Democratic candidates are slightly ahead in the polls, though they're within the margin of error. But if the Democrats gain those 2 seats, they then achieve a tie, a 50-50 tie, which would be broken by the President of the Senate, which is the Vice President of the United States, obviously a Democrat. So the Democrats would control both the House and the Senate, and it would allow President-elect Biden to get his nominees, both his cabinet positions and his judicial nominees, through the Senate for confirmation. There's a little question that some people have raised. It's interesting. And that is, we know under the Constitution that the vice president casts the deciding vote if there's a tie about legislation. There is some dispute about whether or not the vice president gets to cast the tie-breaking vote on a confirmation, when the confirmation requires a majority of the Senate. That issue has never been definitively resolved, and probably would be resolved in favor of the vice president getting to cast the deciding vote. It almost came up in the confirmation of the last Supreme Court justice, but in the end, she got confirmation by more than a 50-50 vote. So the control of the Senate is very, very much up in the air as we speak today. By tomorrow's Durst Show, we'll probably know the results, but in Georgia, who knows whether we'll know the results tomorrow or next week or next month. Obviously, we all know that President Trump has been contesting the presidential results in Georgia as well as several other states, which brings us to what's going to happen tomorrow. Tomorrow was supposed to be strictly a ceremonial day in which the Vice President of the United States, the President of the Senate, opens up the ballots and announces what everybody already knows, that Joe Biden has won the Electoral College votes. He has more than the 270 necessary to be declared president. But nothing is normal, nothing is usual, nothing follows the script in 2020, 2021. And so we don't know exactly what's going to happen tomorrow. We know that my former student, Ted Cruz, is leading an effort to try to challenge the vote count in several key states. We don't know what his end game actually is, whether it's simply to bring to the public attention questions that he believes are appropriately raised about mail-in ballots, about judicial changes and legislative actions, about the 12th Amendment to the Constitution, the text of the Constitution, the various Electoral College acts that were enacted, both in the 19th century and some of the other legal issues that get raised by challenges to the election. Look, I have no quarrel with people who want to challenge election results based on the law. I would have a challenge if anybody try to invoke martial law or suspend the law or violate the law or encourage violence, any of that. But we're not seeing that. What we're seeing is stretching the law to the limits of the law, being very aggressive legally, challenging everything, going to every state, bringing every court proceeding, raising the issue in the Senate and the House, being able to have a debate both in the Senate and the House in order to determine whether the votes would be satisfied, certified. And so we may very well see that tomorrow. We may see the Constitution and the statutes tested and stretched. My prediction is the Constitution will hold. Our system of checks and balances will survive. This will be a stress test of our Constitution. We have those on the banks. We have those in the economic context, stress tests to make sure that our system survives pressures. This is a stress test on the Constitution. It will survive. We will hear some angry speeches. We will hear some belligerent claims, some of which will be true, some of which will be false, many of which we won't be able to determine whether they're true or false. Senator Cruz is going to call for some kind of a commission of the kind that followed the Tilden Hayes election to determine the validity of votes. I think he'd need votes in both houses to get that done, and the votes aren't there. So basically, just to summarize, the Trump team seems to have some theoretical arguments in some states and in front of Congress, theoretical arguments. The Constitution, the law permits what they're doing. They don't seem to have the numbers. They don't have the numbers of senators. We now know that numerous Republican senators are rebuffing Senator Cruz and saying, no, you shouldn't be doing this. Senator Romney, among others, you shouldn't be doing this. We're not going to support you. And they don't seem to have the numbers in at least the states where they have the strongest legal claims, namely Pennsylvania, where they have, in my view, an almost airtight legal claim. In that state, the state legislature basically said that only votes that come in before Election Day can be counted, and the judiciary said in light of COVID, we're going to expand that 3 days. That's an interesting constitutional issue. It's an abstract, it's a substantial issue. The Constitution says that the state legislatures make those determinations, not the judiciary. People on the other side say, but maybe the legislature allocated to the judiciary the power to do that. Interesting question. Certainly a case that could be decided by the United States Supreme Court, but the numbers don't seem to be there. That is, the margin of victory between Biden and Trump seems to be greater than the number of challenged votes that may have taken place during those 3 days. So numbers are one thing, theory is another thing. Tomorrow we'll know more, but we'll also know tomorrow what at least the preliminary outcome of the Georgia election will be. Now, I want to spend the rest of my time on the Georgia election because I think it tells us something very frightening about the future, particularly the future of the Democratic Party. I've been a Democrat since I can remember. I campaigned for Adlai Stevenson. I went around on a sound truck when I was 13, 14 years old for a Democratic state representative in my little neighborhood of Borough Park called, his name was Schuster, I think, or something like that. And I remember, I had a good voice and speaking on the megaphone about how he will do well for our neighborhood, etc. So I've been a Democrat, for 70 years. Why are the Democrats putting me and many other Democrats to the following choice in Georgia? And I think what's going on in Georgia is going to be symbolic of what goes on in many other parts of the country. I'm being told the following by the Democratic Party. Look, we think you should vote for the Democrat because the Democrat, if he wins, will give control of the Senate over to the Democrats. And you're a loyal Democrat, and you should want the Democrats to control the Senate. Fair enough. Fair enough. But in order for the Democrats to control the Senate, You, the Democratic Party, want me to vote for somebody whose views I find absolutely unacceptable and obnoxious. Here is a man, the Reverend Warnock, who has actually said, here's what he said. He said he personally was in Israel and saw, quote, saw the Israeli government shoot down Palestinian brothers and sisters like birds of prey. Reverend Warnock, you're a liar. You did not see that. A, it didn't happen. B, you weren't in Israel, and you weren't in the area and parts of Israel where shooting was occurring while you were there. You've made up this whole story. It's a blood libel. How can you ask me to vote for you when you haven't even apologized and admitted that you made up the story? It's just outrageous that you would say such a thing. It's just not true. Colonel Kemp, the former head of British army in Afghanistan and NATO armies in Afghanistan, and an expert on military activities, has said that there's no army in the world today that takes more concern for not killing civilians and not killing children and not killing innocent people than Israel. Israel has a policy of warning, of knocking on the roof before they attack a military target. Israel goes to enormous lengths to prevent any kind of civilian casualties in any war, whether conducted by Great Britain, the United States, Germany, France, Italy, it doesn't matter. There are going to be civilian casualties, particularly when you have terrorists who hide among civilians and who are civilians by day and terrorists by night. But Israel has the best record of any country in the world in not killing civilians and taking precautions against killing civilians. And yet you told your congregation that you personally saw the Israeli government shooting down unarmed Palestinian brothers and sisters, implying children as well, like birds of prey. Just a categorical lie. You have also compared the wall, the separation barrier, the electronic fence that has prevented thousands of acts of terrorism against innocent civilians. Innocent, by the way, not only Israeli civilians, but Arab civilians as well. You have said that that security barrier is a political wall reminiscent of the Berlin Wall. The Berlin Wall was designed to keep people seeking democracy out of West Germany. It had nothing to do with terrorism, whereas this wall has everything to do with preventing terrorism. And on and on and on. You've compared Israel to an apartheid country. And yet the Democrats are telling me, my wife is telling me, my wife, who's a loyal Democrat, she says you have to support Warnock because we want the Democrats to control the Senate. You're making me vote against my conscience. You're making me send political contributions or show support against my conscience. Why are you doing this? Why do the Democrats make me have to choose between control of the Senate by Republicans and me voting for a senator who has made statements that are so violative of my principles and my ethics? Sure, there are Jews who support him, of course, because there are many Jews who don't support Israel. But there are many Jews and many non-Jews, Christians, evangelicals, Christian Zionists, who find Warnock's statement absolutely appalling. He may win the election, and he may sit in the Senate, and it may result in the Democrats controlling the Senate, and maybe that will produce some very good results in terms of health care, tax reform, COVID relief, you name it, all of that, but at a very high price. You do not compromise with anti-Semitism. You do not compromise with bigotry against Israel. And so, Democrats, you've placed me in a terrible dilemma. I am not alone here. You have placed many people who support the Democratic Party but cannot support vicious, unfounded attacks on Israel and on America. He's also said serving in the military is inconsistent with serving God. I honor the military. My uncle, other relatives served with honor in the military in the Second World War and the Korean War. How dare you say you can't serve God and the military? Have you read the Bible? Have you seen how often in the Bible military action is deemed necessary? The Bible says if a man comes to kill you, rise up first and prevent him from killing you. The Bible is not a pacifistic document. It's a document that requires ethics in the use of military force, but it doesn't tell you you can't fight military force. So why are the Democrats putting us to a choice? Why can't we vote for Democrats who support our values, who don't require us to have compromises in principles? I'm sure Republicans are put to those choices of evils also on occasion, but I'm a Democrat. And I want the Democratic Party to marginalize people like the Squad, to marginalize people like Warnock, not to put them at the center, not to make the future of the Democratic Party depend on me and others like me having to compromise our principles and our values, having to hold our nose, having to cover our ears, having to close our eyes, shut our mouth, and say, we're going to vote the party line. No, no, no. You cannot count on my vote if you keep on nominating people like Warnock. So let's hope that the future brings better candidates. We will soon know whether the Democrats made a wrong decision by putting him forward. They may not have. They may have won this election. That doesn't mean they did the right thing. It doesn't mean the people of Georgia who voted for Warnock did the right thing. So we'll be back. We'll revisit this issue. We'll revisit what's going on with the Democratic Party. If I were a Republican, I'm sure I'd have similar grievances against what's going on in the Republican Party. So tomorrow will be an exciting day on the Der Show, because tomorrow we'll know more about the Georgia election. Tomorrow we'll know more about what's going on in the Senate and the House. We will be watching carefully. We will see the Constitution tested. We will see the stress test administered. We will see the Constitution perhaps stretched. But the Constitution will hold. It held in the Tilden Hayes election. It held in Bush versus Gore. It held in the election between John Quincy Adams and Andrew Jackson. It held early in our history in the election that resulted in Thomas Jefferson beating Aaron Burr. It will hold again. The Constitution of the United States is the oldest and most enduring written document of freedom in the history of the world. It will not lose to the challenges that are now being presented to it. As long as these challenges remain within the context of the Constitution, within the rule of law, they are legitimate. Once, if they ever were to go outside the rule of law, we'd have a very, very different view of that. But right now, the challenges are within the rule of law. So let's wait and see. My prediction, the Constitution will survive. Our system of checks and balances will prove able, capable of dealing with the challenges that are now being confronted, are now confronting it. And so stay tuned. Tomorrow, an exciting day. Today, an exciting day. These are important times in our system of governance. And let's just make sure that America remains within the Constitution, within the rule of law. As long as that happens, we, all Americans, win, whether we're Republicans or Democrats, regardless of who we voted for, regardless of who we voted against. I think all of us would vote for the Constitution of the United States. And speaking of the Constitution, I want to praise a new format. It's called Rumble. Maybe it's not so new. To me, it's new. Rumble is a format a little bit like YouTube and some of the other, but they don't censor. Everything goes. They are operating consistent with the spirit of Section 230 of the First Amendment. They are trying to operate within our First Amendment culture. They're a private company, so they're not bound by the First Amendment, but they're living by the spirit of the First Amendment. And I'm proud that they're debuting the Der Show today on Rumble. So I welcome all my Rumble viewers and listeners, and keep the First Amendment alive. I'm here for you to make sure the First Amendment and the spirit of free speech, the marketplace of ideas, remains open. Thank you, Rumble. Thank you, Chris Pavlovsky, who runs Rumble, for operating within the spirit of the First Amendment, and I'm proud to be participating on your platform. And let's turn now to our callers, the wits that completes the Durst Show. Our first call today is from Utah. George.
Hi, this is George from Utah. I had a question about something I've seen recently in the news of people that are exodusing from California, and California is still doing monetary funds that they're trying to pull from people that are leaving California. And I just don't understand, is there like a constitutional issue with that, with people leaving California and then still having to pay California? I would think that their ability to gain monetary value from people as they were leaving a state would stop at the state line and, when they actually move. I don't know if that's a good way to, clarify. I don't know. But that's just my question.
It's a good question, and I don't fully know the answer to it. I think if you've been a resident of a state, the state has the right to tax you. Even if you leave the state probably has the right to continue to tax you for a bit. Let me give you an example. Let's assume you live in California. You take advantage of its superb education system, elementary school free, high school free, college, University of California, not free, but relatively inexpensive for state residents. So you have been supported by the state of California in your education. And the day you graduate, you leave. Would it be constitutional for the state to continue to tax you on the earnings that resulted from the education system you got from the state of California? Interesting question. Don't know the answer, but I always enjoy being provoked by a very, very interesting and difficult question. So thanks for your question. Let's turn now to our last call for today.
Hi, this is Roger from Massachusetts. So I saw this tweet from a journalist named Melissa Chen, who runs this organization who translates books to Arabics and gives it to people in the Arab world, like your colleague Steven Pinker's book, Enlightenment Now. So I saw her tweet out that any lawyers would be interested in trying to fight to get wokeness and critical race theory out of K through 12 education, and I wonder if you would want to do it, or if you know any lawyers who would want to do it, because I know you've criticized wokeness and cancel culture and identity politics and critical race theory in the past. Thank you.
It's a great question. I would not put grades 1 through 12, any propaganda in the curriculum, whether it's left-wing propaganda, right-wing propaganda, centrist propaganda. Even if it's ideas I agree with, I wouldn't want them in the curriculum. I want the curriculum 1 to 12 to be teaching students how to think, teaching students how to do mathematics, how to do science, how to understand history, how to understand writing, all of those skills. But the idea of instilling in them an ideology is just wrong, particularly for captive audiences, 1 through 12. So, yeah, I would take woke, critical race theory, all of that out of the curriculum and let the curriculum be ideologically neutral. Now, can you do it? It's not easy, but let's at least make an attempt to do it. And let's not allow our classes to be turned into propaganda mills for a particular ideology. Students should be able to go 1 through 12 and develop their own ideology, their own ideas, to be able to listen to their parents, to listen to their priests, ministers, rabbis, to reject their parents, reject their priests, ministers, and rabbis, but let them do it on their own. Let teachers not serve as propaganda vehicles for any grade, but certainly not 1 through 12 when you're dealing with a captive audience and often required schooling. Great question. Again, I want to thank Rumble for, first of all, being what it is. That is a platform that really believes in the spirit of the First Amendment. And I want to thank Rumble for including us on their platform. It's a an honor and a pleasure to be speaking to Rumble listeners, viewers, and please, Rumble people, call in. You want to rumble? Let's rumble. Call in. Ask me hard questions. I promise you I will answer your questions to the best of my ability. So thank you, Rumble, and thank all of you for listening to The Dirt Show.